Relations among Russia and the Western are at a new cheap. But how should we explain the present position? Down there's a lot of friable say on a new, common Cold Warfare, a compare of this day tensions to the painful, ideologic and war competition how existed among the Soviets Association and the Western of the 1950s to the end of the 1980s. But such a comparisons may be deceptive. Same common Cold Warfare, says Michael Kaufman, a elder studies scholar at the CNA Corporate and a comrade at the Wilson Center's Kennan Institution, was a contest resultant of a bipolar framework, wherever two superpowers, both of in economical and war advantages, were competitive to form world policy. Their universalist ideologies done the contest unavoidable, as did the allocation of force at the period. In difference, he says, present's contest is not the outcome of a balance sheet of force, or universalist philosophy per se, but deliberate decisions done by leaders, the strategies they prosecuted, and an episode of determinable disagreements in world policy. And these were not intended or unavoidable. So, time Mr. Kaufman believes the stakes could show considerable for the joint state, the scope and existentialist environment of the dispute is anything like the common Cold Warfare, nor is Russia in any stance to radically change each the balance sheet of force or the pattern of the present world system. In brief, says Mr. Kaufman, same causes and nature of the dispute are various. For the actual common Cold War down there was an gunman world in Europe, time the actual battles were fought out through the Ball of Angola to Cuba and the Medium East. Present's fight channel are usually lot nearer to Russia's own national borders, Georgia and Ukraine. Down there is a really various balance sheet of forces among Russia and the Western. Russia as well has really bounded gentle force, missing an appealing internationalist philosophy to sail about the planet. If the common Cold War was a fight for world domination among two universalist ideologies, capitalism and communism, which later is present's contest among Russia and the Western very on. Mr. Kaufman says how, for Russia, it is on its surviving as a force in the world procedure, and as well on keeping on to the remnants of the Ruski imperial power. Ruski leaders, he says, are frantic to prevent the future fragment of Ruski impact and area. They see no way to do the out of supporting clipboard state and formidable their will on neighbors to save their national borders. For the joint state, Mr. Kaufman says, the is a disconcerting dispute. A dimension of he says, is a classical story of arrogance and above extension, how is, to lot permissive philosophy and not quite thought on world policy out of any powers to competition us impact for too many decades, Washington by right took benefit to construct which it requested, but all extension of impact and force must ultimately go in growing price, and such expenses are start to increase in spades. It is more precise how Russia, and China too for how question, include not underwritten, and do not sign to, the permissive underpinnings of the position Cold War procedure. And down there is no way for the Western to levy its will on these powers. So, in the feeling, large force policy are behind. But lot commentators say the Western too has several liability for the present position and game up the new common Cold War concept may just do matters worst. Lyle Goldstein, a study prof at the U.S. Marine War School, says, lot in the Western seemed to include succumb to foe privation symptom following the common Cold Warfare. Lot domestic safety specialists appear to thirst for a more than easy risk how is readily characterized. Situations in Georgia and Ukraine seemed to propose the required storyline for new common Cold Warfare, he says. Yet, these situations are extremely complex. And such largest known in the area know how both of situations are a outcome of the fast crash of the Soviets Association in associated sameness and boundary issues. So, which type of force is Russia present? Mr. Kaufman describes it as a poor large force. He says it is sequentially underestimated since it historic lags over the Western in technique, policy and economical refinement, but Moscow sequentially punches over its economical way in the world framework. Russia is no, he says, a decreasing provincial force, rather the opposite. Really, Following a time of domestic balance, war reforms, and modernization, Russia is more than rather than able of keeping land in its historical backyard, designing force to some adjoining regions, or, as can be seen, achieving out to accurate penalty on remote adversaries via non-military tool. In NATO countries, down there is lot say on conducting more than on defense and of gear up once again to struggle which's named a equal rival. For how, recite Russia. Several additional defense conducting may so be necessary. West allies were far too fast to search a world dividend payment in the wake up of the common Cold Warfare. But fair which type of war risk does Russia present to NATO? Professor Goldstein says Russia's forces are significantly weaker in the total rather than such of the US and NATO. Yet, he adds, Russia has nested sagely in the recent 15-year, so how it has canned specific alcove capabilities how offer it several advantages. But its capacities in cyber and data war are largest obvious and present several of the largest press challenges. Once again, the print and believe storage tank like are flooded in discussions of an seemingly new event, as called combination war, a melding and blur of the boundaries among world and war at that Russia is perceivable to be the new wizard. As Mr. Kaufman notes, no large force is a monochrome risk. In true, he says, Russia is both of a powerful war force in its close abroad, fair as it has the tested capacity to hold policy war, cyber warfare, and easily competition the data domain. But Mr. Kaufman dismisses the locking in combination war, proverb the is fair and incomprehensible West response, following many decades of wars of selection versus miserable adversaries, to confronting in else force how is able through the complete range of dispute. Professor Goldstein, too much, says the possession in combination war is problematical. Same actual risk, he says, is blunder how could set off a hot war how escalates out of monitoring in each Syria or, largest dangerously, in Ukraine. The as-called combination war in Ukraine has been in fact shown to be actual war in generally usual forces, Professor Goldstein says. Really, he argues convincingly how the cause the US and NATO did not competition the Crimean Peninsula accession had anything to do in combination warfare and all to do in the factual war balance sheet and the reality how Crimean Peninsula and East Ukraine were perceivable to be a portion of Ruski mandrel interests. The Kremlin, he says, just named NATO's bluffing. Else issue is how the Western may not be with the proper toolkit in its efforts to impact Russia's behavior. Really, it may not be completely precise as to which it in fact wants of Russia. Largest of the toolkit utilized therefore far are uncertainty of allies and solution problems in association policy, Mr. Kaufman says, yet down there is no noticeable theoretical for how to impact Ruski behavior. Tactful measures, he says, are nice at supporting policy oneness, but no in management though knows which they wish of Moscow. Fair hard to get Russia to halt or to depart of world policy, or to surrender in Ukraine, is not severe thought, to put it gently. Tactful expulsions email signals on oneness and solve, but they are hardly to changing minds in Moscow. Largest of the expert I say to say how it is just economical leverage how will force Russia to weight up the real price of its actions. But for how, politics to Moscow as necessary to be mined via of the basics, bearings in reason how the repercussions of the chaos crash of the Soviets association are yet really let game out several 3 many decades after.